Disclaimer. The following is a fan-made production. Lorekeeper Studios does not claim to own any of the characters, locations, or scenarios found within the Hyrule Warriors game or the Legend of Zelda series. All such rights are reserved by their respective owners. This production is made out of a love for the stories that have already been told, and we encourage you to support the original products. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The Angel of Destiny, Episode 1, Psychostorm. Chapter 4, Preparations. The following is a continuation of the account residing in Tycalra's journal.
We spent the next few hours preparing for future ventures. Princess Zelda picked out the 100 troops that would stay and protect the school, and prepared the remaining army for the upcoming battles. As the troops began to prepare themselves, Zelda called a meeting with all of the generals to decide what our next move would be. We all gathered in one of the classrooms at the school in order to meet in privacy. The Hylians had brought in a large circular table that contained a large map and placed it in the center of the room. On the map were somewhat crudely drawn images of all sorts of different things I didn't recognize. I did, however, recognize the school, which had a number of tokens placed on it, which I was able to guess was supposed to symbolize our troops. As all of the generals began to file into the room, I quickly realized that I wasn't the only one who wasn't exactly where I was supposed to be. Excluding those I had already met, it seemed that everyone else was in a similar situation to myself, having been transported away from their homes by a mysterious orb of light in the air. The weird thing was, all of them were from Hyrule, just at different points in time. Why was I the only one here who seemed to be from another world entirely? With yet another one in my collection, I started to worry that all of the questions I had been saving since I had arrived wouldn't be answered at all. Growing slightly frustrated, I once again pocketed my questions and turned my attention towards the princess, who had now begun to speak.
Thank you all for being here. I understand that you all must have many questions, but I worry that we have more pressing matters at hand. Sia's army is only growing, and we need to find a way to stop her once and for all. We will need assistance from all of you if we are to succeed.
Zelda's gaze slowly worked its way around the room as she examined the group. After seeing everyone in our party, she took a deep breath before continuing her address.
But I suppose, since most of you are foreigners to this particular era of Hyrule, and have never met before, some introductions are in order. I am Princess Zelda of the modern era, and it is a pleasure to be standing alongside such great monuments of this world's mighty history.
Finishing her instruction, she turned to the being next to her and gestured for them to also introduce themselves, starting at the woman with the large sword.
I am Impa, leader of the Sheikah tribe, and I will be leading most of the troops from this point forward.
The introductions slowly continued around the table, each one giving small descriptions of who they were and what era they were from. Fi from the era of the sky, Darunia and Rudo from the era of the hero of time, Agatha and Minna from the era of twilight. I should note here that I have chosen not to write most of what they said, simply because it is not relevant to anything that happens beyond this point. Regardless of how relevant it was, and how much of it I understood, I thought it was still fascinating to see so much history in a single room. I can't imagine that people come in direct contact with this many icons of the past, especially since, according to what I had heard, they had all been dead for centuries. However, with this, I feel the need to point out that it is a character flaw of mine to let my mind wander. When I see or hear something that I find particularly interesting, I have a tendency to tune out the world around me and instead turn all of my thoughts elsewhere. I was so lost in thought that I hadn't even noticed everyone looking at me and waiting for my introduction. Oh, hi, I'm... Again, I hesitated. Up until now, no one from this world had heard my real name. They had all continually addressed me by the title Tycalra. I wasn't sure if I should reveal the truth or share what would be familiar to them. However, after remembering the way the Hylians cheered when they heard that name, I decided to officially take on the mantle of Tycalra. This name clearly means something to these people, and I don't want to impede on their hopes by revealing the truth. My name is Tycalra. I'm from Earth, not Hyrule. I've I've never been in a war before, so I'll be relying on you guys to show me the ropes." A few chuckles echoed throughout the tent, and I couldn't help myself but join them. I was glad that even with the threat of war, we were able to keep a positive mindset. When I had gotten here, everything was so serious, and it made me happy to see that things were finally starting to lighten up a bit. I looked around the room at the merry band of heroes we had gathered. I smiled, grateful to see that I wasn't the only new guy. No one here knew each other, and yet, despite being complete strangers, we were all here, united under a common goal. Each one of us had in some way been negatively affected by Sia's forces, and all of us wanted to stop her. The remaining introductions continued mostly as expected. A few Hylian captains introduced themselves, and I was finally able to identify the blue-haired girl as the sorceress Alana. I was surprised, however, when it got around to the man in the green tunic. Instead of speaking, a small yellow fairy appeared out from under his hat.
I'm Proxy, and this is Link. He doesn't talk much, so if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer in his stead.
Confused, I looked at Proxy. I knew that Link had spoken to me relatively openly before, but now he seemed to be less talkative than a potted plant. As I wondered why he suddenly wouldn't speak, I remembered the expressions of surprise that Zelda, Lana, and Impa had made when he'd spoken to me earlier. It seemed to me that Link wasn't much for conversation, which would explain why the others were surprised when he suddenly decided to talk to me. I shrugged it off, since I know how hard it can be to talk to people sometimes, and returned my attention to the task at hand, planning to ask him about it later.
Well, now that everyone has been introduced to each other, shall we get things underway? I shall be blunt to propose that we make haste in obtaining the Master Sword. With all the gates of souls closed, that will be our best chance in our quest to defeat Sia.
A flurry of "I agrees" and "Hear hears" rang out across our small group of heroes. I was about to agree with them, as some of the troops had filled me in with some of the history and legends of Hyrule and its heroes before meeting. But when I opened my mouth, I remembered the temple I had seen in my dream, and the woman who had asked me to find it when I woke up. Noticing my hesitation, Zelda turned to question me.
Do you disagree, Tycalra?
What? No, of course not. I think that's probably our best option. If I have my facts straight, the Master Sword will be integral to our success. But the thing is, while I was asleep, I saw a vision of a temple in the middle of a jungle. And there was a woman there who told me to find it as soon as I woke up. Even if I have to go on my own, I feel like I need to go there first.
You saw the Angel's Palace.
The Angel's what now?
The Angel's Palace is the place where your weapons, the Blades of Destiny, were to be kept so that you could retrieve them when you next arrived, which I suppose would be now. It's no surprise that you're getting visions telling you to go there.
I haven't even considered that you would need to retrieve the blades. That complicates things.
So the question becomes not what would be the first step, but which is more important, the Blades of Destiny or the Master Sword?
Could we split up and go for both?
That sounds like a horrible idea.
Why not?
We don't want to spread too thin. If we do, then Sia's armies will be more equipped to destroy us.
Not to mention the fact that almost all of you need to be present in order to break the seal on the Temple of the Sacred Sword.
I watched as a fairly heated argument broke out in front of me, debating the importance of each of our goals. I had no idea such a simple statement would spark such a debate, but I knew I had to do something about it. My mind raced, trying to find a way to get everyone to calm down. Looking for possible strategies, I looked down at the map we all stood around. Leaning over to one of the soldiers who was standing right next to me, I asked if he knew where the Angel's Palace and the Temple of the Sacred Sword were located. He nodded and pointed to two different locations on the map. One appeared to be in a dense jungle area, and the other was in the middle of an open plain. To my surprise, the two were not incredibly far from each other, and it seemed as though they were both about the same distance away from us. I quickly began to formulate a plan that I felt would most effectively retrieve both of the weapons that we needed. What if Darunia is right? If we planned it right, we may be able to do both at the same time. Everyone suddenly became quiet, and all eyes turned to face me. Well, looking at the map, the two don't look very far from each other, and I was just thinking, well, what if most of our troops start to head towards the Temple of the Sacred Sword to get Link the Master Sword, but a few of us take a slightly longer route through the jungle. That way, a couple of us could break off in the jungle and go to the Angel's Palace completely undetected. If the large group makes a big enough spectacle of themselves and the smaller team is subtle enough, we should be able to get both weapons, distract Sia's forces with a more prepared army,
And get the weapon from the Angel's Palace without them even noticing.
That just might work.
I looked around the room once again and saw a general consensus of agreement among my peers. I felt somewhat proud of myself. Not only had I gotten everyone to stop arguing, but I had come up with a solution that everyone seemed to agree on. Maybe it was foolish of me to put pride in such a simple and relatively meaningless task, but to me, a 17-year-old, coming up with such a solution was one of the most impressive feats I had accomplished up to this point.
Well then, it's settled. In the morning we shall begin making preparations to approach the Temple of the Sacred Sword, and Tycalra can begin preparing for his own journey to the Angel's Palace.
A series of cheers rang out throughout the room, and for the first time since I had gotten to this world, I felt at home. This may not have been what I had asked for, and I certainly didn't know anyone or anything about this world, but I knew it's where I needed to be. I was going to give this world a real reason to remember the name Tycalra.